In 2019, a Reddit user made an intriguing post on the Persona 5 subreddit, asking a very simple question. Was Persona always meant to be political? The post was downvoted and met with mostly negative comments. Among them say, "Not really. P5 just has the theme of rebellion, and so what do people usually rebel against? Corruption. The only political thing they're doing is calling out the corrupt police department." It's game rant, don't listen to those c***s. But you're right, none of the games except P5 really do anything at all with politics, and in P5 it's glossed over so that Shido might as well just be another evil CEO with a little more stake against Joker. That's what I assumed it would be on my first run. It's all because of the shitty adults, dude. Teenagers are pure and can't be corrupt. Hashtag talented writers. These people, of course, are wrong, almost to a poetic degree. I believe that games like Persona 5 are a form of art, and while I won't delve into the whole all art is political argument, though I believe that to be true, I think the political nature of Persona 5 specifically is beyond question. Maybe the juvenile protagonist being subjected to overly strict disciplinary action for stopping the assault of a woman, which adults are wholly unsympathetic to, all at the hands of a corrupt career politician, was just so subtle that it was lost on many people. But just about every major aspect of the story has clear and direct political implications. This one is probably the most in-your-face motif of Persona 5, with the very first ever promotional image being a direct communication of this. Gotta say, pretty tone-deaf, but from the story to the visuals and indeed even the music, Persona 5 has a very clear anti-authoritarian message. Though maybe you can think of one or two counterexamples, and yeah, we'll come back to those. Throughout the game, Persona 5 asserts that acting outside the law for the common good is acceptable and good, and people not only have the right, but also the responsibility to act in opposition to institutions, often government ones, that are unable or unwilling to support the needs of the people. A message that I'd say, all in all, is pretty based. Not only do the direct actions of the Phantom Thieves exemplify anti-authoritarianism, the portrayal of police really drives this idea home, not only in what they directly demonstrate, but also their inaction. Your first exposure to the police in Persona 5 is when you, a teenager, are arrested under dubious methods and subsequently drugged and brutalized in order to extract a confession out of you by any means necessary. Throughout the story, it is made abundantly clear to you that the police are far more invested in maintaining the status quo, often by means of violent suppression, than lifting a finger to stop predators, crime syndicates, exploitative CEOs, corrupt politicians, etc., etc. In Sai's palace specifically, you come to learn that Sai, and indeed the justice system itself, is so obsessed with maintaining his conviction rate that calling it a justice system is all but laughable. While this game was obviously made within the context of Japanese society, one could maybe draw some connections with the West. And I'll just leave it at that before I sound like I'm trying to suggest that anything about Western society is flawed. Despite saying all this, I'm somewhat hesitant to call it a strictly libertarian message in the American context of libertarianism, aside from the questionable age dynamics. The main reason that Persona 5 couldn't be classified as a libertarian game is its relationship with the core tenets of that ideology. That is to say, oh boy. Now, if you've watched this far and you generally describe yourself as someone who's pro-capitalism, I'm gonna hope that you're open-minded enough to hear some things that might challenge your viewpoint. Otherwise, you've probably already left a dislike, hate comment, and went about your business. So please continue to keep an open mind and understand that I'm just talking about what's in the game already. For a game that takes a serious look at Japanese culture, it's inevitable that capitalism is brought up. But what Persona 5 does that's particularly interesting is, quite literally, putting you in the shoes of a young person and letting you come to understand the effects of capitalism. Whether it be working long hours at understaffed companies for absolute joke pay, or witnessing mass exploitation that's both fervently rewarded and protected, the influence of capitalism is felt throughout the experience of Persona 5, whether you, the player, are cognizant of it or not. Fortunately, the game throws you a rope with the whole otherworldly monsters conveniently dropping you absurd levels of cash. Otherwise, this game would definitely not be a good time. What people really don't give Persona 5 enough credit for is its use of imagery to really portray just how fundamentally broken society is. Just the visual of these washed out, half-conscious automatons roaming the streets seemingly without specific direction or, well, soul is just so damn powerful. This, of course, is made the most upfront in Okumura's palace, where we battle through hordes and hordes of robots who are entirely expendable to those who run the factory and aren't given any considerations such as breaks, days off, safety, or humane working conditions. Eventually, we confront Okumura, a character who could reasonably be surmised as a representation of the 1%, who is utilizing the system of capitalism to its fullest extent in order to build a spacecraft to propel him to the political world. While the comparisons to the real world are described to be coincidental, if taken 100% literally and ignoring the timeline completely, you might find an ironic humor in the eerily accurate translation of CEOs making things worse for everyone on Earth and escaping in literal rocket ships to space. And of course, the entirety of the police force is mobilized to catch those responsible for this objectively evil bastard meeting an arguably fitting end. I would like to state that I am not endorsing anything. And I almost forgot Cheeto's Palace. And rather than going into another long-winded, though eloquently stated, if I do say so myself, analysis of class, wealth, and power, I can basically summarize it as rich and powerful people are racist assholes who also have a tendency to be pedophiles. I'll be upfront by saying that I have essentially zero knowledge of collectivist society. I've never spent any serious amount of time outside of the United States, so all that I know of collectivism is based on word of mouth. But even with Japan being a highly collectivist society, Atlas's writing of Persona 5 asserts an emphatic argument towards individualism. I do think that this one is less straightforward than some of the other aspects of the game. The fansite's poll, more or less, stands as a characterization of collectivism, mostly communicating an ignorant general body that's all too happy to sway with the current popular sentiments as determined by the media and ruling class by proxy, but entirely resistant to individual thought that challenges the status quo. Mementos, being born from the collective mindset, is another example of powerful imagery. The perpetual and despondent nature of Mementos really tells you everything you need to know about the game's stance. Under collectivism, individuals become slaves to the collective will. The Phantom Thieves, then, could reasonably stand in for the ideal view of individualism, with the intrinsic value of the individual being exemplified by their noble actions and agency that fundamentally changes society. They serve as a symbol of hope for the new generations, and then being phased out due to collectivist apathy is a fairly stark denunciation of that culture. While the strength of the public is what gives them the power they need, it is ultimately mustered through individuals like Mishima and other confidants. Persona 5 Royal delves further into this, with Akechi and Maruki being ideological stand-ins for individualism and collectivism respectively. While Maruki's reality serves to fulfill the wishes and welfare of the collective, Akechi is utterly repulsed by it, citing the lack of individual autonomy as an affront to the personal values that he holds. He goes so far as to fight for its destruction, even with his very own existence being collateral. Thither, my friend and I made a video discussing it, and while my arguments aren't presented all that well in hindsight, does encompass why I actually believe that Maruki's reality would ultimately be beneficial and preferable to the canon ending. While I couldn't really say if this game's messages on individualism and collectivism are valid, the way it portrays it is masterful. Really goes to show you the power of aesthetics. But with the stances on other issues that the game touches on, there seems to be some conflicting messages, leading me to my next point. Persona 5 has many powerful arguments regarding things like authority, capitalism, and society. However, I'd be remiss to not point out some fairly glaring inconsistencies present in the game. Firstly, the issues that capitalist society brings absolutely cannot be resolved under an individualist society. This, I think, most of us know firsthand. The inarguable fact that collective action is needed to make any progress in this regard totally flies in the face of the game's harsh anti-collectivism message. Also, for a game as anti-authority as Persona 5, and as much police corruption is portrayed, it is capital H hilarious that they'd opt to make Makoto want to grow up to be a cop. Just no words on that. And lastly, while not directly tied to any of the above-mentioned themes, the portrayal of someone who the player is supposed to admire as a positive example of authority, a teacher, also being a literal pedophile, is equal parts ironic and disturbing. Oh right, I mentioned in the previous video that I was going to make that video on Kawakami. Maybe next one. I make video essays on anime and games. Be sure to check out my playlist on Persona video essays. My most recent ones talked about Morgana and how he ruins the game. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing to the channel and joining the very prestigious list of my Patreon supporters, namely, MinorDude369, Supporters gain access to exclusive content, including work in progresses of ongoing projects and custom voice requests. Either way, thank you for watching.
Anyway, $4 a pound.